Hello. Today's lessons are from a number of Psalms, and we'll start with Psalm 26. In this Psalm, David calls to God in prayer for divine security. He asks God to search his heart, intentions, and actions and save him, redeem him from the fate of sinners and the wicked. He affirms his integrity and deliberate walk with God and asks for vindication as a result. Although it started out like he was boasting about his righteousness when he was like, "Oh, I am so I have been walking with you blameless," etc. It is clear that it's God's steadfast love that is the source of his righteousness, and David alludes to that. In Psalm 40, David talks here about faith preserving him in trial. And all who wait on the Lord in patient expectation will discover security and refreshing newness in fellowship with him. David praised God for answered prayers. He had waited for the Lord in patient expectation and wasn't disappointed. His relationship with God gave him firm footing and renewed stability. In verse 3, he said, "The Lord responded to his cry for help and gave him a new song." In verse 6, when he said, "Sacrifice and offering you did not desire." At first, when I read that, I was like, but this is the Old Testament times. Sacrifice and offering seemed to be what God wanted. But this didn't mean that the Old Testament system of sacrifice was worthless. But rather, it emphasized that sacrifice and offerings were worthless unless presented to God with the right heart posture, and also in obedience to what he had commanded. In 1 Samuel 15:22, it says to obey is better than sacrifice. So for me, that made me now think of whatever it was that I was offering. Praise, thanksgiving, worship. It is the heart posture that matters, and not the fact that you are doing what, sacrificing and following, prescribed commands or, instructions. In Psalm 58, here David expressed anger over the apparent lack of judgment for the wicked. Yet he was assured that God's judgment on the earth will come, and he ended it with a certainty that the score would eventually be evened out in the end. Like Job, David raised a similar question as to why the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper. God is the righteous judge who will reward the faithful and bring vengeance upon the wicked. Fret not thyself. That was me adding that. In Psalm 61, David speaks of the assurance of God's protection. He sought safety in God's presence during difficult times. He longed to be guided by God and to God, the rock that was higher than him. So he says, "Lead me to the rock that's higher than I," in verse 2. And in spite of the circumstances under which he wrote the psalm, David recognized that the safety and security that he enjoyed in God's presence in the past would remain. And so he sings his praise to him forever and offers gratitude. In Psalm 62, David expresses a calm resolve to wait for the salvation of God in this psalm. Quiet waiting helps us to reflect on God's greatness and ensures steadfastness. David extols the nature of God who he waits on. He calls him his rock, salvation, defense, glory, strength, and refuge. Names that he has called God over and over in some of the Psalms that we have read. It's hard to wait on God in difficult situations. How much more in a crisis and then waiting in silence? But David demonstrates the benefits of waiting in silence and was firmly established because of his faith in God. Now, finally, the lessons from Psalm 64. Which was a psalm that David wrote while he was oppressed by the wicked, but still rejoicing in the Lord. He felt overwhelmed by the secrets of the enemies against him, and he expected slander from them and was bracing himself against their wicked intentions towards him and wicked arrows aimed to destroy him. This shows just how powerful words are. because David was saying, oh, I know they will say, and he seemed like, oh, he was bracing himself against what his enemies will say against him. So words are powerful, and evil words do more damage than we can possibly imagine. This psalm reminds us the importance of guarding our tongue and just speaking life whenever we can, and knowing that some of the things that we say can have more deadly impacts than we could ever imagine. Now, here's the lesson that I learned about God. God didn't intend for the sacrifices and the offerings to be permanent. Remember when he said sacrifices and offerings you did not desire. It was never fully sufficient to appease him. When David said this in 46, it shows us that God has always been after our hearts and not the animals that were offered as sacrifices. He referenced God giving him open ears that hear him instead of delighting in sacrifices. So he says, a sacrifice you have not, whatever. Instead, you give me an open ear. We should be thankful for Jesus Christ and the sacrifice that he made on the cross that has given us ears that hear God and a heart that longs for him and is drawn close to him. That was my main lesson from this, reading these chapters and from that psalm. And I hope you got some good lessons from there as well. Thank you for joining me today. Tomorrow, we'll go back to 2 Samuel and I'll be sharing lessons from chapters 19 to 21. Have a good day. Bye.